And that's one of the reasons I wanted you to come on tonight, which is, if not for Biden insisting on being the candidate early on and there not being a process, you may have been in that field. Does this change your disposition at all with respect to the Democratic Party and their convention and your potential participation?
Well, if the Democratic Party was smart, they would come to me, because the polling consistently has shown that I'm the only person who, if I were running for a Democrat, as a Democrat, I'm the only person who can beat President Trump. In fact, Zogby did a poll this week that showed in a head-to-head race, I beat President Trump by 14 points. Kamala Harris loses to President Trump because I take a lot of President Trump's voters. That would be the smartest thing if they actually wanted to win the election. But I think the corporate forces that now control the Democratic Party ever since 2010, when the Citizens United case unleashed the tsunami of corporate money into the political process, both political parties have become essentially wholly owned subsidiaries of BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, the pharmaceutical industry, the military contractors, et cetera. And all of this chaos right now is distracting us from the thing that we really ought to be talking about, Chris, which is the affordability of, the fact that we're losing the American middle class, and mortgages have doubled in price over the past 4 years. 60% of Americans can't put their hands on $500 if they have an emergency in their family. We got $6 bread, we got $6 milk, we got $5 gasoline, and nobody can afford to live in this country anymore. A middle class, and it's all driven by these two presidents who spend $8 trillion apiece printing money, which is a tax on the middle class. If you earned $1,000 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, that $1,000 is worth $560 today, and it's because we spent all this money on wars and all this money on COVID, which these two presidents gave us, those lockdowns.
There's no question that's the discussion we should be having. And there's also no question that's why these two were so unpopular. We've never seen anything like this before, where the two main people were seen as weak as this. Now, you got into a point of intrigue this week, and I'll just ask you straight up to tell the audience, is it true that you offered in a phone call with Trump to get out of the race in exchange for a job in the administration?
No, that is not true.
What is the truth?
Well, President Trump called me actually a few hours after his assassination attempt, and he talked. We talked about unifying the country and the importance. I think he was really at that point, Chris. He said to me, he asked me actually during that conversation whether I had a religious bent, and I said, yeah, I do. And he said, well, I think I do right now, because I just had an experience like none other.
I'm sure he did right then. I mean, what a moment to survive.
Yeah, and it was really a miracle that he survived, and thank God that he did. But I think that he really had a kind of revelatory moment where he was thinking of, how do we unify this country? I'm very, very flattered that that he reached out to me. We had a long conversation that night, a couple of long conversations. They were very pleasant. I was very impressed by some of the things he said.
But it wasn't about you dropping out.
I ended up we talked about a wide range of things, and I'm not going to go into the exact detail because that would violate a trust with President Trump. But there was no agreement made. And, I'm in it to win it. Our polling numbers are way up since that time. Our volunteer numbers since President Biden dropped out are way up. Our engagement numbers are way up. And, I'm in it to win it, as I've been from the beginning.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. You have a platform for the duration of this election to make your case to the people. I've been very clear with the audience. I do not believe the parties should be exclusively deciding who gets a voice. We'll see how this plays out. Thank you for taking the opportunity. We'll speak again soon, Bobby. Thank you. Hey, thank you for watching. Please go to newsnationnow.com, newsnationnow.com, and you can find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button down below. Then you will get more of News Nation's fact-driven coverage.
By the way, Pat Ward at our White House unit, Fox News can now confirm that the Vice President, Kamala Harris, spoke with former President Barack Obama yesterday. Obama came out with a statement yesterday following Biden's decision to drop out. It did not endorse Harris. Obama also did not endorse Biden in 2020. So presumably, he probably said, hey, listen, I'm not going to endorse you at this point. The big question, because what we've heard from the Obamas is they want an open process. They want a competition. So it sounds like at least over the phone, person to person, Barack Obama said, I'm not going to endorse you right now.
Remember, he didn't endorse Joe Biden either,
Nope.
ever, 2016 or 2020. Let's bring in Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's running as an independent. Juan is running as a Democrat. They basically told him he couldn't by moving the New Hampshire primary. Welcome, Robert. Great to see you. Your reaction to what's happened over the last 24 hours?
I think it's encouraging, and thank you, Steve, and thanks for having me. I think it's encouraging that that President Biden dropped out. That was something, you know, when I got in a year ago, I said that he was not, that his deterioration made it clear was not going to improve, and that it made it clear that he could not run the country. I think the Democrats really need to do what President Obama said, which is to have an open process, a genuinely open process. So much of the primary process was rigged. The country knows that. It's rigged to benefit the corporate elites. And I think the Democratic Party really needs to distinguish itself from the Republican Party. President Trump announced yesterday that Jamie Dimon is his choice for Commerce Secretary, and that Larry Fink is his choice, who's the head of BlackRock, is his choice for the Treasury Secretary. And I think the Democrats really have an opportunity now to distinguish themselves as the party of the American middle class, as the party that cares about working people, that cares about the deficit, that cares about the chronic disease epidemic that is devastating the people of this country. And but I think they're going to need an open process, and I do not see that any evidence they're going to do that.
Real quickly, Robert, they say that they want to have this, and by the way, we want to confirm that first if Donald Trump has selected them. We haven't seen those reports just yet. But Robert, can you go into detail about this open process? How can you have an open process when the people don't get the vote? When the delegates get to decide who's going to be your nominee? They could have done this months ago, but they decided not to do that.
There's a couple of ways they could do it. One is they could have ranked choice voting. If they have ranked choice voting, it would give where the delegates choose not only their first choice, but their second choice, perhaps their third choice. That would be a genuinely open process. Another thing they could do is to base it on national polling, to do some really good polling, to spend a couple $1 million polling the American public and seeing who is more likely to beat Donald Trump, and giving that information to the delegates, and allowing them to make a decision based on that. It has to be some kind of fair process, because it looks to the American public that the system is just rigged, which it is.
Right. So they're going to have a meeting on Wednesday, the DNC, to figure out the rules going forward. To be a nominee in the process, you need 300 signatures from the about 4,000 delegates. You know that. Robert, you are a lifelong Democrat running as an independent now. Are you going to be one of the challengers? Are you going to challenge Kamala Harris?
Well, I'm running, Lawrence, I'm running as an independent now, and I think the Democrats would make if they looked at the polling, I'm the only candidate who can beat Donald Trump.
Right.
But I'm not going to get into the Democratic Party as long as the system seems rigged. If they had a fair system, I would definitely look at it.
Even though they covered it up, and we're a month away from the DNC, only 107 days away from voting day, the Dems and the media heard this news yesterday, and they started praising. Listen to this.
He has put people over politics and patriotism over personal position. And this is another heroic act in a long-running series of heroic acts by Joe Biden.
You know, the president took the honorable path. And I think, yes, this will be about his legacy.
Today's decision by Joe Biden to not seek re-election shows the difference between a selfless president and, in Donald Trump, a selfish person.
I think today we should focus on Joe Biden's incredible legacy of service to our nation, his selflessness, his accomplishments.
Today is about what Joe Biden did. He gave America a lesson in patriotism.
I know they're so happy because they didn't see a path for Joe Biden to win. But how angry should they be? How angry should the American public be? Because they covered this up. They knew about what was happening behind the scenes, and it wasn't until the debate when they really recognized it publicly.
Yeah, you know, when they were talking just now, it reminded me of George Washington, who actually did a genuinely selfless act. Nobody expected him to leave the presidency. He could have easily won another term. The whole country wanted him to stay. And King George III, when Washington announced that he was not going to run again, King George III said that makes him the greatest leader in human history. And he did something that was genuinely selfless. I think the perception here is that President Biden was forced out. I commend President Biden for 50 years of service to our country, but I think that the last several months of trying to stay in this race when he was clearly not capable of performing the duties of his office were a black mark at the end of his career. I think also Kamala has a lot of explaining to do because she was seeing the president every day. Yeah. And she was telling the American public again and again and again, he's completely capable of running the country. There's no signs of deterioration. There's no signs of cognitive impairment. And that clearly was not true. And I think that she has a vulnerability there, whoever she runs against. She has a big vulnerability about explaining because she's been the concealer in chief.
Right, and we all are vulnerable because he's going to be here for the next 5 months because he still can't recognize the Secretary of Defense as of last Saturday. All right, now on the assassination attempt that happened a week ago Saturday on the President of the United States, today we're going to get the Secret Service, the former president. The Secret Service director is going to be in front of Jim Jordan's Oversight Committee. What questions do you have, and do you have any doubt that she should be fired?
I don't know enough about it. I will tell you this. First of all, I have Secret Service protection right now, and the Secret Service has been doing an amazing job for me. And I'm very, very happy with the level of protection they're giving me and the level of concern and their professionalism. There are issues that I don't understand when, Gavin DeBecker Associates was protecting me for the year of my campaign prior to the Secret Service coming on. And every time I did an outdoor event, they had drones flying overhead. Mm-hmm. And we're looking at all the neighboring buildings. And so when this happened to President Trump, I did have that question about why were there not drones there, but I don't know enough about it. I haven't studied it. It seemed to me that there were clearly some lapses. Mm-hmm. For example, when we were in Philadelphia, where I gave, they didn't like me doing outdoor speeches, but when we were there, if there were buildings they couldn't cover, they would hire a security guard for $18 an hour to go up and sit on those buildings in a lawn chair.
But Robert,
I think there are things that...
Yeah, Robert, real quickly, though, they only gave you Secret Service protection after the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. What took them so long to give you Secret Service?
I think that was a political decision. I think they knew that I was spending $500,000 to $1 million a month on my own security, and they wanted me to be spending that money on security. One out of every $3 that we raised, we had to spend on security, and I think the Biden administration wanted me spending the money on that rather than on ballot access and advertising.
It should not be the president's decision. It should be automatic.
Thanks, Robert.
Robert Kennedy joining us from Massachusetts. Thank you very much, sir. I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.
So the Democrats have called themselves the party of democracy, but they ran the least Democratic primary ever. They skipped Iowa, New Hampshire, jumped straight to South Carolina. They killed all primary debates, booted RFK Jr. from the party because he posed a threat to Joe. Today, RFK Jr. held a press conference to tell Democrats, I told you so.
A year ago, a little over a year ago, when I entered this race, I predicted that President Biden suffered from a degenerative condition that was not going to improve and that it would make it impossible for him to govern effectively. The reaction of the DNC to that obvious condition was to hide it from the American public and to use their power over the Democratic Party nomination process to make sure that nobody could compete with President Biden in a way that would expose his deficiencies. And as a result, we are where we are today, which is in a period of crisis.
Presidential candidate RFK Jr. joins us now. So, RFK, you ran the right way. You did what you were supposed to do. You're a Democrat. You primaried a Democrat incumbent, and they wouldn't let you. How did they jam you out of this thing? Because now look at what happened.
Yeah, I think it was a strategic mistake by the Democrats, Jesse, and you and I have talked about this before, but they got rid of, they changed the primary rules while we were running the primary. They changed 60 different rules to make it impossible for anybody to challenge Joe Biden. One of the things that you remember that they did to me is I'd been campaigning in New Hampshire, so they adopted a rule that said that any political candidate, any Democratic candidate who campaigns in New Hampshire, who steps foot into the state of New Hampshire, that all of their votes would go to the president, all of their delegates would go to the president, instead of going to that. And then they shut down the Florida primary. They shut down a bunch of primaries, just said, we're not running them. We already have our candidate. You know, a few weeks ago, President Biden was ridiculing Vladimir Putin, who won 88% of the vote in Russia, and he said, you know, that was a fixed election because President Putin had made sure no adversaries could challenge him, and also that he had fixed the press so the press wouldn't cover his adversaries. Well, the Democratic Party succeeded in doing the same thing. I haven't been allowed on any of the Democratic networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, as you know, Fox has allowed me on, although Fox, people like you have allowed me to speak. You debate me. You give me a platform, even though you don't agree with things that I say. And I think that's the way the media is supposed to work. But the other media networks have forgotten about that.
When you're playing with children, you just change the rules in the middle of the game and just kind of make it up as you go along. You can't do that when it comes to these high stakes. You know how things operate at conventions. There's been a long history of chicanery at these things. You've now have uncommitted delegates. Are we going to see bribery? Are we going to see quid pro quo? Are we going to see ambassadorships promised, donors greased? This is a sprint to grease as many delegates by mid-August as possible.
Yeah, I think, some of that is bound to happen. I think most of those delegates are kind of mom and pop people. They're committed to Biden. They committed originally to Biden. His releasing them, I think a lot of them are probably idealistic people who want to see the Democratic nominee, or terrified of Donald Trump, who want to see the Democratic nominee succeed. But I don't. The indicators now, Jesse, is that the party elites are not really going to let go of the process, and we'll see what happens. The last time, there's a lot of similarities between this election and what happened with my dad's election in 1968. There was a war going on at that time that was very controversial and it was very damaging to our country. There were protesters in the street. The convention was in Chicago. And my father, who was leading, got knocked out by an assassin's bullet, not by a resignation. You, in effect, had an open convention, but the DNC at that time tried to maintain control over it. They put their candidate in, which Hubert Humphrey. There was the convention became riotous, and the riots shocked the American public, and they didn't want anything to do with the Democratic Party after that. And I think a lot of people in the Democratic Party probably should look back to what happened in 1968 and take some caution from allowing the party elites to continue to exercise control over their choices.
That would be good, sage advice from RFK Jr. And we will be, Jesse Waters Primetime, in Chicago, covering the DNC, and now it just got a whole lot more interesting. RFK Jr., good luck.
Thanks for having me, Jesse.
Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.